Alright, my story, I'll start it through my high school years. I was drinking a lot, hanging out with a lot of people. Now, at this point, I don't believe my mother was saved. What year were you saved, Mom?
2004.
2004. Okay, so this began a
Mm-hmm.
couple years before my mother's salvation, but
Okay.
I started using ecstasy at the age of 15, sniffing cocaine at 15, partying and abusing drugs, fornication, all the bad stuff. But as the years progressed, the drugs got harder, more money, more abuse. I was introduced to crack cocaine when I was 16. Yeah, I was 16 years old. It was the summer I was in summer school, as a matter of fact. I was coerced into going down to Detroit to get some cocaine, a large quantity, as a matter of fact. And when I got down there, the people had lied to me, who I gave money to throw down with, so to speak, and excuse me, and they wound up planning to get cracked the whole time. And so when they got it, I was like, no way, I'm not doing that stuff. I've heard too many bad stories about that, I mean, stuff you see on TV, how could I do that? So I took my money back, and it turns out they didn't need it anyways, but they needed money for paraphernalia and gas for the ride home. So after a bunch of, begging and pleading, I was with one of my buddies, Josh, at the time, who was actually my good friend, and who I tried the ecstasy with, I did the cocaine with, heroin, crack, all that stuff. I actually wound up doing with him first. Never realized how much of a bad influence he was on me, but so I wound up trying crack cocaine that day, and at first, after the day ended, I didn't think I'd ever do that again, but times came around again where they called me up like, hey, you want to go back there and get some more? And I tagged along, and it continued for about, I'd say, a good 6 months, because it was right before I turned 17, and I was tired of the fiending and like the immediate withdrawal of the crack, so I was like, I need something to bring myself down with to mellow me out, and one of my other buddies introduced me to heroin, and progressively from 17 to 19, all the other drugs subsided and heroin wound up taking over. It was just that high that I chased for. I didn't care about anything else. I had an apartment at the time when I was 19. I had a son on the way. My girlfriend at that time was pregnant for about 5-6 months. And I was on probation for marijuana possession, just always substance abuse, always. Like, my life revolved around this from since I was about 15 years old. Just could never stay away from drugs. So I wound up going to jail for failing a drug test, and I lost my apartment when I was 19. Now, my son's mother was still pregnant, she was trying to work with me. They didn't understand the severity of it because I had just started using the needle at that time. And my son's mother found out through other people, and, she checked my arms, and I had marks on it, sure enough. I would wind up figuring out down the road how to cover up those marks and use different areas of my body to where I could hide it from people. But you can't hide the fact that you lose a lot of weight, you look pale, your face breaks out, you just look like complete crap, and there's nothing you could do about it. So I did 3 months in county jail, and this point in my life, I believe, is where Jesus reached out to me. It was Christmas time. I was incarcerated the day before Thanksgiving, and when Christmas time comes around in Macomb County Jail, they hand out bags. A Christmas bag from a local church. I believe it's a Catholic church, but it comes with a little mini Bible of the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. So I had that in my footlocker, my tub that I kept all my food in, stuff like that. But that whole time in jail, I never ever read that little Bible, ever. I wound up getting out of jail in the beginning of February. My son was born shortly after that. After he was born, I started shooting heroin again and smoking crack occasionally. And things just progressively kept getting worse. Now, this was 2008. I was about to turn 20 at this point in my life. And I was living with my sister and her boyfriend. I had went back to my parents' house, just trying to stay clean. I could not get off drugs. So all of 2008, I was using heroin, using a drug called Suboxone to get off of heroin with, neglecting my family, putting drugs first. And at this point, my mother was saved, and she was always trying to, spread the word of God into me. And I was just too living in the world. I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to keep doing what I wanted to do. I was neglecting my son, my family, and loved ones. I was burning plenty of bridges at this time because my son's mother, some months before, had came clean to my family about what I was doing. But as I said before, they didn't understand the severity of it because they never researched it. They didn't know anything about drug addiction. So at the end of 2008, I was kicked out of my sister's house for not holding employment and for using drugs. I went and stayed with a buddy. My son's mother went with me, and I was still heavily using drugs. So from the end of 2008 into about spring of 2009, I was stealing from people, family, friends, and loved ones, and it got to a point where I had nowhere to go. And my son's mother was just trying to love me from a distance, pretty much. You know, she just didn't want nothing to do with me. You know, I'm the father of her child, and yet I'm not being there for her, which is a pretty tough thing to swallow there. But so the beginning of about spring of 2009, I checked myself into a rehabilitation center called Sacred Heart, and I was in there for about 30 days. I was learning how to 12-step everything, you know, stay clean and sober, try to keep my mind off of drugs. And when I came out of rehab, I stayed back at my parents' house. And, you know, my parents were really cautious about my behavior. I actually stayed drug-free for a couple months and then started hanging out with the same friends, started stealing change from my parents' change collection. I had stolen every last piece of jewelry my mom owned from her grandparents, and my mom was just so devastated by that. And they drug tested me one day, and I failed, and they kicked me out. And I had to go stay down the street at a friend's house who I was using the heroin with as well, who I would steal, go sell stuff, and go down there and use drugs with him. Now at this point, Jesus was about to enter back into my life, and I would never, well, I understand now why, but at the time I really didn't. I stayed with that buddy for about 3 weeks to a month, and then I had to check myself in another rehab because it was just getting out of control. You know, steps were going farther. I was going back to my parents, taking some of my old belongings and selling them, researching what was valuable to sell for drugs. So I checked myself into another rehab, and I relapsed the same day I left. But let me rewind back for a second. Actually, when I was at Sacred Heart, I was actually withdrawing there. And I can't forget this. I don't know why I skipped over it, but I was having such a hard time because the first 5 days you're in there, you have to do a detox program where they give you medicine, you know, to help you wean off the drugs so you won't leave, and also so you're physically better. And I just had one night I just had such a hard time sleeping. I just could not get over it. Like, man, they had a chapel on the other side of the grounds in the building, and so I was like, you know, I can't sleep in this bed. Maybe I could sleep in the chapel. And I've known of God. My mom had been trying to preach to me and, you know, spread the word of Jesus to me. But I just never cared to listen. And as I said before, I was just living in the world. So I went into that chapel, and they had a big statue of Jesus on a cross, about 20 feet tall. I mean, you couldn't miss it. It was big. But I just sat there, like, you know, crying and crying. And you know, like, save me. What can I do, you know? It was so tough. Withdrawing just was the worst feeling imaginable. Not to mention the things I was doing to my family, you know. So that was like the first time I reached out to Jesus. It was like I was looking up at that statue, like waiting for it to move, you know, waiting for him to hold me or something. And I wound up falling asleep that night actually for like 4 hours, like I didn't have withdrawals at all. And then one of the security guys had to wake me up and bring me back to my room, and I couldn't sleep. Tossing and turning again, cold sweats, you know, restless legs. It's just not a fun thing to go through. And so, you know, I got out, stayed clean for the months, like I said. You know, stole the jewelry, got kicked out. I went into another rehab. I relapsed immediately that day when I left. My buddy had came and brought everyone over to my house, and we went to a bar down the street and drank. And the only reason I was even living that day was because my grandma had some money put aside for me that I used to get a motel room with. And every time I relapse, and I think this speaks for anybody, it gets worse, like drastically worse. I wound up breaking into a couple homes with that buddy who I relapsed with that day. And, you know, a week gone by after the last one who I broke into coincidentally was a Richmond police officer's home. I didn't realize until I was in the house. And so, you know, I took a firearm from the house, some cash, and, you know, I wound up selling the gun in Detroit for drugs. I used all that money for drugs and paid another week for that motel room because my parents cut me off from money because I was failing drug tests for them. So the part of the rule was, you know, if we use this money to help your living situation, you have to stay drug free. That didn't last because I wanted to still get high, you know. And so when I got arrested, and I went to Macomb County Jail at the end of 2009. And this was in December, so mind you, the Catholic organization brings bags in of the Christmas gifts. Socks, a toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, and that little Bible. So, you know, I'm sitting in here facing 15 to 20 years in prison, and I'm just like, man, something's got to change, you know. What can I do? So I opened up that Bible, and, you know, God, He works in magical ways. The guy next to me, coincidentally, he was facing a lot of prison time, and he was actually in prison. They got in trouble. Well, he had an issue 7 years prior to that, which caught up with him, but at this point, he was, you know, in ministry school, and he just was really knowledgeable about the Bible and the Lord. And out of all the pods and rooms in that jail, he was next to me at this low point in my life. So, you know, I started reading that Bible and the Gospels, and something connected. It's like, wow, you know, I knew right then and there, you know, God spoke to me. He's like, this is my son, he died for you. And it's like, as I read those Gospels, it was like I was there, you know. I felt everything that happened. You know, I called my mom the next day, you know, telling her how I'm reading this Bible and this guy's helping me, and she was so happy. You know, I said a prayer with him and, you know, got saved. Said I'm going to start living more for Jesus instead of me. So I did 5 months of county, got bonded out, and at this point in my life, I started going to the Rock on Bond with my sister Amber Haig and Nate Knights. And I had a small Bible group that I was going to, who Jenny Huey was in, Ken was in, and Bob Shippey. And I was out on bond for about 6 months. I was facing prison time, so, you know, in between going to Bible study or church, I was still living in the world and partying and drinking and stuff, and doing things I knew I wasn't supposed to. So when the end of the year came down and I went to court, you know, I wound up getting 2 years sentenced to a Hyde prison. And they gave me credit for my 6 months doing county. So I only had to do 18 technical months there. And so I go to prison, you know, I'm bitter about it, but I'm wanting to make the better of myself. You know, I had Jesus under my belt at this time, and I wanted to try to strengthen that and turn my life around for the better, because once I left prison, you know, it's almost like a fresh start. So I did 13 months in prison and got let go on good behavior, but during that time in prison, like the first few months there were awesome. I was going to church, I was in multiple Bible studies, you know, staying out of trouble and reading the Word, and then just being in that place for so long just wears on you so bad. It's just nothing but ignorance and bad people, you know, going out and doing the same thing, not caring about anything. There's only a few Christians in there who I actually, you know, surrounded myself with and went to church and Bible class with. And I wound up getting into a fight at about a month and a half before I left. And at this point, my mother had noticed my behavior changing drastically. I was cursing a lot, you know, just really bitter and down and negative, you know. She's like, aren't you reading your Bible, you know? And I was like, no, I'm just so tired of this place, I can't focus on doing anything, you know. And I got in that fight and I went to their hole, you know, segregation for 30 days. And I was just so tired of being there. I was just supposed to have a review with my judge my first 6 months in there to possibly be released, and a year has gone by and I haven't even been seen. And so I'm in the hole and I'm just praying and praying, you know. I'm just like, God, what do you want me to do? You know, it always seems like at my low times I'm just asking for your help. I'm thinking I can live life by myself, you know. So I really, really read my Bible a lot. I read the New Testament a couple times over when I was in there, and I was praying a lot, you know, trying to strengthen my faith. And I believe God put me in there for a reason, because I was going to get released soon, because I wound up getting released a month after and into the world. And all that happened for a reason, so my faith would get strengthened, and when I got released, I could continue living a godly path. And I've been home now for about a year. I've been delivered from addiction now for over 3 years, or close to 3 years. You know, the Rock has given me a great home here. I'm in a small Bible group with the Shippies. Mike Borovica, who I love to death. You're my partner, bud. I love you. He's, you know, just great friendships with the Rock. Just a great church, a great home. and I just couldn't be happier with where I'm at in my life right now. You know, the discipleship journey is something that really hits home with everybody. Our small group is outstanding. We all try to apply that to our lives as best we can. And the outreaches that we do are just great, you know. The homeless out groups or outreaches we do, you know, the October Bash coming up. I haven't looked back. And I tried multiple times to get clean on my own. It just never ever worked until I met Jesus. And I'm not perfect. I still struggle with things, but I have the whole rest of my life to try to improve myself every day, and the Rock is a great place to help do that. Thank you, Rock Community Church, for having a seat for me. You have blessed my life beyond measure, and I appreciate everything that you've done.